Africa has a huge reservoir of untapped technical talent, and tech companies have a huge amount of work that they need skilled employees for. Andela is a talent accelerator that finds people in Africa who are eager to learn software skills, and then trains them in a 6-month boot camp and pairs them with jobs at companies such as Microsoft. Brice Nkengsa is the director of engineering at Andela, and he joins the show today to discuss Andela. This episode touches on many of the themes of Software Engineering Daily: boot camps, scaling and organization, microservices, the future of work, obviously Africa. It's quite an interesting episode. Hope you enjoy it. Continuous integration is so useful that I've started using it on my own personal projects. SnapCI from Thoughtworks has the fastest setup I've ever seen. I registered for SnapCI with my GitHub account, and after a few clicks, I had continuous integration pipelines set up for a Node.js application and a Rails application that were just sitting on my GitHub account. And I don't want my users to experience breaking changes, so I want to run a large suite of tests for my application every time I push a change. And SnapCI will run those tests quickly, in parallel, on a worker that SnapCI spins up and takes care of for me. Whether you have personal projects like me, or you work at a company that is looking for the perfect tool to improve the deployment process, go to snap.ci/softwareengineeringdaily. SnapCI embodies the lessons that Thoughtworks has learned from 20 years of software deployment, the same lessons that have been written about by Martin Fowler and Jez Humble. Check it out at snap.ci/softwareengineeringdaily. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and you would get to check out continuous deployment. snap.ci/softwareengineeringdaily. Thanks for listening. Brice Nkengsa is the Director of Engineering for Andela. Brice, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you for having me here.
So what is Andela?
So Andela is a talent accelerator. So we recruit the most talented people, young people in Africa, and we train them to be world-class technologists.
Okay, and how do people join Andela?
So we have a recruitment program, and we have applications that go out every quarter, I think. We're currently recruiting people in Nigeria and in Kenya.
And through this application process, what are the types of people that join Andela? What are their ages, or what's the prototypical type of person that ends up joining the accelerator?
Right. So we have people, usually young people between, I believe, 19 to 25, 26, and usually people from a wide range of backgrounds. So we have people who have previously completed computer science degrees, engineering degrees, some people who have no experience in computer science at all, some people coming from radio or music or all different kind of backgrounds who are just interested in tech and software development.
Those people who don't have formal training, do they have some sort of self-taught experience, like having taken some Coursera courses or something like that?
Not always. I think some of them have a really big interest in software development, but as well we do have an online curriculum that we expose to applicants so that they can kind of go in and try different things, learn the basics like HTML, CSS, the basics of computer science before they actually apply to the program.
So can you describe the application process in more detail? Because just for people who don't understand the scale, there's like thousands of people applying and a very small subset of people end up making it in. And so there's this multi-step application process where you screen people in a variety of ways. Explain some of the details of that application process.
Sure. So like I said, it begins with the online curriculum. So we encourage anybody that is interested in joining the program to go through the curriculum and kind of get accustomed with the basics of computer science. Then they submit an application. The application consists of a bunch of questions, maybe some test questions. So around problem solving, and like the plum profile. That is to, and then the plum profile is essentially kind of like finding the archetype of the person. So like their emotional intelligence and things like that. And then after that, they complete a test. So we have our own assessment platform that we have exposed to them, where they complete a couple of coding challenges. And after that, a subset of them are recruited for are selected for a 2-week bootcamp. So during the 2-week bootcamp, they come into our offices for a 2-week immersive bootcamp where they build, projects, web projects during the 2-week bootcamp. And after the 2-week bootcamp, the selected few are admitted to the program.
Right. And I like the multi-step funnel. I like the benchmarking on emotional intelligence. And it seems in somewhat contrast to the ways that standardized testing approve people or disapprove people from entering a college system. It seems a little bit more meritocratic, a little bit more aligned with what actually makes a person successful beyond their schooling period of education. Did you always have that application process, or did you start with a slightly different application process and iterate on it?
We'd iterate on it. I think the first application process was more. There was no online curriculum. There was no sort of testing per se. There was more around problem solving and emotional intelligence to figure out the best people that would be that would succeed in the program. And we ended up getting a wide range of people. So, and because we also want to kind of streamline our learning and the training program, where we can predict how many people, how fast people can learn to some extent. So we needed to make sure that everybody coming in has some sort of baseline. So that's why we kind of started adding this multi-step process where we have the curriculum exposed so that people can start getting accustomed with the technologies and the curriculum. And the 2-week bootcamp was revised multiple times. We iterated on it, on how to best select the people. And so it's a process we're always iterating on.
So the 2-week bootcamp, that's kind of interesting. So we've done a bunch of shows about boot camps, coding boot camps. Describe your coding boot camp. What are the objectives? What are the types of coursework and curriculum that are focused on, and what are you benchmarking the participants on in that period of time?
So the boot camp is a 2-week boot camp. The boot camp is,
and just to be clear, this is like the last phase of the screening process to see if people get into Andela, and once they get into Andela, through that 2-week bootcamp process, there is a 6-month training process. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
So the bootcamp is the final step,
right.
The final stage of the recruitment process, and anybody that makes it through the bootcamp is officially accepted into the program. And yes, the first 6 months or so are the first phase of the learning, but the whole program is 4 years. But the first 6 months is just like the first phase of the learning before our developers are, I guess you could say this is the first graduation kind of thing where they become Andela developers.
Yeah. Right. So 4 years, that's almost like sounds like a university education. But so I am curious a little bit more about this bootcamp process, and then we'll get into a little bit more about what Andela is like once people make it through the entire application process. So what's going on during that bootcamp where it's the last filter of deciding whether a applicant will make it into Andela?
Right. So the 2-week bootcamp is a very immersive period where we throw a lot of challenging problems at them and kind of see how we're looking for fast learners and see how they pick up the technologies and the languages that we're throwing at them. So the bootcamp typically starts in the first week where we teach the fundamentals of computer science, HTML, CSS, and depending on the bootcamp, we run bootcamp in different languages. So we might run a bootcamp in Ruby or Python or JavaScript or PHP, for example. And the second week of the bootcamp is more project-based. So each individual in the bootcamp has to build a certain web project within a specific amount of time. And at the end of the bootcamp, they present that project to everybody in the bootcamp.
Right. Okay. And then some people perform well enough in the bootcamp to make it into the main curriculum of Andela, and so there's the 6-month training process that happens after that, and then people from Andela get hired by companies to do engineering work. So we'll get into the discussion of companies hiring people, but why don't you walk me through what goes on in that 6-month training process?
Okay. So the 6 months, the initial first 6 months of learning, we like to call it learning because we believe that everybody is a champion of their own learning, and Andela is really there just to facilitate that learning. So we're not necessarily training in the traditional sense where we're telling people what to do. So during that 6 months, or that first 6 months, is a combination of simulations and apprenticeship. And simulations is essentially simulating a typical engineering team, right? So where you have developers, you have a team lead, typically you have a product owner, and they have to build features based on priorities from the product owner. So we kind of simulate that environment, and we have different simulations teams building products using different languages. So Ruby on Rails, Django, Laravel, or JavaScript, or PHP, or which one did I miss? Anyways, and we also do mobile development, so Android and iOS.
I think it was Java.
So that's the first stage. Yeah. So that's the first about the first stage of the learning process. And then what we've seen is that while simulation is great to simulate that kind of engineering environment, it still doesn't have it's still not enough because, number one, the project they're building are not really used by anyone. They're kind of like training projects, and the pressure is not there to deliver it, right? So what we do then is like we transition them into apprenticeship. And what that means is we have our own internal engineering team that is building our own technologies, our own systems to help Andela operate efficiently. So as part of their learning, we transition them into apprenticeship where they get to work with an actual engineering team that has users, that has deliverables, that has the pressure, that has all those things. And they get to apprentice under more experienced people where they get to observe how more experienced developers kind of think through problems, solve challenging problems, and think about building products. So you can think of like apprenticeship as Andela being the first client for the developer.
Did you go through an academic computer science education?
Yes, myself. I went to school at the University of Waterloo.
Okay,
graduated.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And you studied computer science?
Yes, I studied computer science. Yeah.
So what is so one of the ongoing discussions that we have on this show is like kind of what should software engineering education look like, or what should computer science education look like? Or are these different things? Are these disjoint topics? Is there some overlap? I think it's interesting because I think that there are the way that academic computer science is taught I feel like is kind of like the slow route to learning. And I feel like when you have a program like Andela that is focused on teaching people to engineer products, you bake in a feeling of pressure, you bake in, but the title of boot camp, we've done all these shows about boot camps, like I mentioned, and these boot camps have this feeling of pressure. They have these segments of, you're working on a project all on your own. You have to learn this ability of independence, but you also have to learn how to work in teams. And this is in stark contrast to, many of the ways that academic computer science works. Of course, I think Waterloo is slightly different because at Waterloo you're forced to do an internship, or you're supposed to do an internship
program. Yeah,
right. And I think I'm pretty sure that was like part of the inspiration for Andela. But I'm very curious about your thoughts on education, how academic computer science compares to this bootcamp model, or this condensed education model. Is there anything that this condensed education model misses out on? Is there anything that is great about academia that cannot be sort of replicated or improved upon by the bootcamp model or the hyper condensation of education model? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think the traditional academic model is great for learning the principles, I think, and the condensed model is great at learning the practices and how to actually do it, how to actually build it. And I think that's where Waterloo was a really great school, where the academic setting was focusing a lot on those principles, like computer science principles that are very important as a software engineer. And then the internship part kind of gave us like the practical experience. And that's the same thing that we kind of had to implement here at Andela, because initially we've been iterating a lot on our learning practices. And initially we were focusing a lot on the practice. And then we ended up getting client feedback that our developers didn't really know the principles, like principles of computer science. And so we
big
have to take that feedback. Hello?
Yeah, big O notation.
Yeah, exactly. Big O notation, all those things. So we had kind of take that feedback and figure out, okay, how can we ensure that our developers are not, missing out on all those fundamental principles, algorithms, data structures, big O notation, all those things, and ensure that our developers had kind of like the best of both worlds, worlds. So,
and that stuff is not that hard to learn if you start with the practical material, right? Like that's my impression, at least. Like if you start by teaching people how do you build practical stuff, and then you say, okay, by the way, there's this thing called big O notation. By the way, here's this thing called Dijkstra's algorithm that's like a kind of complicated algorithm. My impression is that the theoretical stuff is actually much easier to learn if you start with the practical rather than vice versa. And the thing that I think academic computer science gets wrong is they teach the theoretical first, and then they expect the practical to be easier because of that.
Mm-hmm. I think you're probably right. It's probably easier, but I feel if you get too deep in the practical and you start creating those behaviors as a professional software engineer and not really thinking about the theory, like you kind of miss out on that. So I think it's a great discussion to have. I think you need to learn those principles before you get too deep into the practice, because the behaviors you develop when you're practicing should be influenced by the principles that you know about, right? And I think I personally feel like that makes you a better developer.
And it sounds like that was some of the early feedback that you were also getting from these companies that were hiring people from Andela, like, oh, these developers are really efficient, they're doing a great job, but they don't seem to understand theoretical efficiencies and things that you would learn by doing formal proofs. And
exactly.
Interesting. So let's talk more about that. So when an Andela engineer comes out of the 6-month training process, and I guess we haven't talked too much about that training process, but people can probably imagine. I guess you did mention that there's the training. It's essentially sort of like you replicate the type of product development that would happen at a company, but it's more like in a training environment. So you kind of have some training wheels on, and then once you get out, it sounds kind of like a residency for a medical personnel or something. And after that, these people can get hired by big companies. How does a company hire Andela engineers, and what kinds of companies are willing to hire Andela engineers?
Companies hire Andela engineers just by contacting us from our webpage or contacting one of our sales people. And the type of companies that we've seen that are interested in Andela engineers have been from a wide spectrum, from big enterprises to small startups, mid-stage startups looking to expand their engineering teams.
And I have heard that some contracting, because this is basically contracting, because the people are not fully, they don't become fully employed. Like if Microsoft hires a team or several Andela engineers, those engineers are not full-time Microsoft employees; they're Andela employees.
So that's not entirely right. So
okay.
Yes, they are still Andela employees, but they are full members of the engineering team of our clients or partners. So they follow the same processes that the company is using. They follow the same engineering processes. They are there on the stand-up, team retrospective and all of that. And they are fully dedicated to the team, fully embedded in our partners' teams. And we even have our developers fly out to those companies' campuses or offices overseas, to fully immerse themselves into the teams and build relationships, so that when they are working remotely, it's more efficient.
And but what I have heard about people who are not full-time employees is, there are certain contracting firms that have a strong reputation that they've built up over time, like Accenture, for example. Accenture has a great reputation. So a bank, for example, is perfectly willing to hire Accenture to build its internal, ticketing system or something. So over time, these contracting companies build a big, powerful brand where companies feel comfortable hiring them. Has that been an issue where you've had to sell companies on this idea that, hey, these engineers are great, they're trustworthy, I know Andela is a new brand, but our engineers are just as good or probably better than the Accenture engineers, and you should trust us? Has that been a challenge?
Yes, absolutely. In the beginning, it was a challenge selling to companies that our engineers are just as talented as anybody. And we had to, figure out different ways of approaching this. But essentially, we essentially told them, hey, try us out for a month. And almost all of our clients were delighted by how embedded and how, good our engineers were. And a lot of them feel that it's not a typical contracting firm. It's really just like an extension of my engineering team. Is really just remote workers that are part of my team.
And once you get a company to try it out, and if it works out within one team at a big company, does it spread within the company? Do people talk about, hey, we tried out Andela, they meshed with our team perfectly, everybody in the company should try Andela? Does that spreading happen, or do you have to continue doing the sort of sales process throughout the organization to encourage other people to try hiring Andela engineers?
Absolutely, that happens organically. We've always said that developers are base salespeople, right? So as soon as they join a new company and they're doing a great job, they're delivering value, automatically we see those companies wanting to expand and even create an entire team around these, initial developers that join the team. So definitely we see that a lot.
Interesting. So you have a model where you can kind of offer, hey, we can give you a whole team of people to work on a project, as opposed to just saying like, hey, you can just hire this one person and then, maybe another team hires one person. You can offer actual just full teams to carry out a project.
Yes, absolutely. And as part of our 4-year program, like we said, we have a natural progression of experiences. So we have the initial developer, then we have developers at different levels, like developer, mid-level developer, team leads, and eventually architects and stuff like that. So we can definitely provide teams of engineers that are just kind of like an extension of the teams that the company already has locally.
Now, my sense is that this Andela happening now is no accident. It's not like suddenly somebody thought of the idea and now it's the time. I mean, that is true to some extent, but also I think that there are tools and technologies and cultural movements that are all conspiring to make this work really well. Like, my view is that outsourcing in the 90s, for example, probably didn't work as well as it could today, because today there's all these tools for transparency and accountability, and it's obviously Slack and other communication tools. I mean, we're having a VoIP call cross country and it's like no issue at all, and we take it for granted at this point. And there's also reputation-based systems. I mean, companies are hiring Andela engineers with the idea that there is a reputation of the engineer that they're hiring, and that engineer is aware of their reputation, and they're not just going to slack off, as opposed to how people thought about outsourcing in the past. Like, you're just hiring this faceless team of people, and there's no accountability there. The team just says, okay, we're going to check all these boxes on your deliverables. So I think all that conspires to have much higher quality contract work or temporary work or whatever you want to call it. Do you agree with that?
Yes, totally. I think the technology has helped a lot in terms of how people work in distributed ways, like you mentioned Slack, Skype, all those tools, even pair programming, like you can do pair programming with Screen Hero and all those things. So it has definitely helped in terms of bridging the gap, the location gap between the workers, and making it feel like, we're all in the same room working together.
And I guess not to mention Stack Overflow or Hacker News or these other things that sort of standardize how work is done, how code is written. Now, like, the biggest debate we're going to have about style is tabs versus spaces, or something inconsequential like that. Whereas in the past, it might just be like, you would get highly variable code quality. Probably code quality has flattened somewhat, gotten overall higher quality. People have a better universal understanding of what good code consists of.
Exactly. And again, you have all these tools out there that are helping standardize code quality, like Code Climate and all those things that engineering teams are using to standardize how people write code.
DreamHost Cloud gives you fast virtual machines and storage for a low price. DreamHost Cloud brings infrastructure as a service together with 24/7 support and a great community. The DreamHost Cloud platform is all based on open source code that uses OpenStack and Ceph. Go to dreamhost.com/SE daily to deploy your application today and support Software Engineering Daily. With the easy-to-use UI, standard API, and a powerful SSD infrastructure backend, DreamHost Cloud has everything that you need to deploy and maintain your application. The billing for virtual machines is simple. Only 600 hours are billed max per VM per month with 100 gigabytes block storage included and free bandwidth for a limited time. It's easy to try at dreamhost.com/SEDaily. Deploy your application to DreamHost Cloud today. I know you've got that side project waiting for its deployment, and when you decide to deploy it, check out DreamHost at dreamhost.com/SEDaily. Thanks to DreamHost for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Now let's get on with this episode. There is also this idea that when you hire a contractor, is that a bad word? Is that something that can classify Andela employees as, or how do you classify them?
Well, I wouldn't quite classify them as the contractor, at least in the typical sense it's been used. I think, Andela developers are just like any other engineers you will hire, except they're working remotely. Like they're literally part of your team, and they are employees of your company. Well,
do they have stock?
They're employees of Andela, but they are part of your team. They are engineers on your team, versus some contractors where you're pushing out projects to them and they're working on it and coming back to you with the results.
Do they have stock in the company? Like if Microsoft hires Andela employees, do they get stock?
If they want to give our developers, then by all means, I think.
Okay. But most of the time, maybe not? Or does it just vary?
I'm not too sure about the contracts, but yeah.
I see. Well, yeah, I mean, just the reason I pointed out is because I think there's a mistaken idea in technology companies that employees need to be receiving stock in order to do their best work. And I think this is a really weird and mistaken idea. People work at companies for all sorts of different reasons, and people can be incentivized to do work that is effective for the long term by all kinds of ways. I mean, this is where I think the reputation system is really important. The fact that we have all these reputation systems, whether you're talking about Facebook or LinkedIn or just people being a longstanding employee of Andela, so just these different reputation things that have become increasingly public, I think hold people accountable in a way that people used to talk about, an employee needs equity in order to be accountable. And that, to me, seems less true today.
Yeah, I think that companies using equity to motivate people, I think it's more around giving people a sense of ownership into what they're building. So I could see an argument that way where, if I'm owning this thing that I'm building, then I'm more driven to see it succeed and make it succeed. But like you point out, like people have, different motivation. I think for me, I believe that people are mostly motivated by, they want to be autonomous. Like you want to be able to do your work and not necessarily be micromanaged. And you want to be able to master your craft and be able to, especially as software engineers, you want to be able to be the best at this that you're doing. And as well as, I guess a sense of knowing that you are building something that's, bigger than you and that's something for a larger purpose. So I think those three elements are enough to motivate people. But I can see why some companies would offer equity to kind of give you a sense of ownership and a sense of we're all in this together and we all want to see this succeed.
You are the director of engineering at Andela. What does that role entail? Because we're talking about a company that the most of the core motivation is train people and then get them jobs at companies, and there's obviously all kinds of ongoing management of that process. But what kinds of engineering work are you doing within Andela? What kinds of technologies do you build to help facilitate this process?
Sure. So as director of engineering, my role is to build out all the internal tools and products of Andela, and in order to make all our different business units and departments work more efficiently. And as well as I talked about apprenticeship, so providing that final stage of learning for our Andela developers as they advance through that first stage of the program. And in terms of the type of technologies that we're building, it's a bunch of web tools, mobile tools, automating workflows for people and things like that. Yeah.
Can you talk through some of the internal tooling that you're building and what you have to support?
Sure. I think one of the main tools we're building is a dashboard tracking all the data about our developers. So if you kind of think about our pipeline, right, from the recruitment to the bootcamp to the initial phase of learning to apprenticeship, like we have kind of like a bunch of metadata about our developers that we need to track, and so that we can make informed business decisions. And even during the bootcamp, like all the assessments, all those things are like we need to track all those things and build tools in place in order to track all those things. So that's kind of type of technologies that we're building internally.
I read your blog post about migrating from a monolith to microservices. We have talked through this migration process a bunch of times on Software Engineering Daily. I don't know if we've talked about boot camps or moving from a monolith to microservices more often, but there are two polar opposites. They're two different things that have rarely been discussed on the same show. Why don't you explain what was the monolith and what was the process of breaking it out into microservices? Just because I always like to hear different people talking through this architectural process. It seems like quite a pattern that's common these days.
Right. So the monolith was around. So we had a couple of monoliths really. So we had one system, like I mentioned, one central dashboard tracking all the data about our developers. Then we had another system tracking or for assessments and things like that. And we had a bunch of other systems, like an isolated systems that kind of were responsible for a single business function. But what we realized was that a lot of the data in those systems was replicated, or at least it needed to be shared across all of those things. So especially especially in the way we work, it's kind of like a workflow where from recruitment, it's kind of like that pipeline that goes from recruitment through when a developer gets placed on a client engagement. So the same way our systems needed to work in that same manner, where we needed to have data flowing from all of these different systems in a uniform way. So it just made sense at that point to break apart all of these monoliths and kind of create a single backbone microservices architecture where we can have all these independent business units that are providing functionality to different apps, and that can be scaled independently. And that's kind of how we started to migrate our monoliths to microservices.
So that brings up a question. Does Andela intend to build and sell its own software products at some point?
Potentially. I think we are doing a lot of things a lot of unique things, especially in the learning science side, and building tools to support us in the way we practice learning and things like that. So potentially, once we can get it to work well enough for us internally, then we can release it out to other people who might be interested.
Well, what has been an interesting business model that seems to have emerged over the past 10 to 15 years is the model of you build one product that is kind of well defined, something like Amazon selling books or Tesla selling cars, and then over time the process of whatever you're building evolves into a product of its own. So So with Andela selling engineers, I don't know if that's the way you want it put, but that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's kind of like, over time, Amazon got AWS. Just kind of coincidentally, they're like, hey, we realized we're really good at selling books because we architected this thing this well. So why don't we just basically sell the infrastructure? And then the same thing is kind of going on with Tesla, where they're saying now, hey, what we're really good at is building these electric things, and over time, the Gigafactory is going to be the product. That's actually what we're going to be. That's the main product to be focused on, because it's kind of this bare bones infrastructure of something that makes something else. And simultaneously, I could see Andela, just because of a very unique churn of people passing through Andela's system. If the system itself is well architected, maybe there is some ancillary product that will fall out of a well-engineered system, where the system essentially brings in people and outputs great engineering talent. I'm sure there's going to be something interesting that comes out of that if it's well-engineered. Absolutely.
We're definitely doing a lot of things in the learning sciences, how we track learning for people, how we, incentivize people to learn, and all those things. How we get people to work in a distributed fashion more efficiently. So yeah, in the future, I think potentially we can have products coming out of solving problems in the distributed work environment or the learning work environment.
I want to talk some about Africa. How does the usage of computer technology in Africa differ from North America?
The usage of computer technology, I think in Africa, I've had the most experience in West Africa, in East Africa, because we operate in Nigeria and Kenya. But I think in general, Africa is very mobile, and there's a lot of, mobile is probably the primary way how people access online content. And but a lot of people are also using, laptops, and you're starting to see a lot of people like using mobile, rather wearable computing, like, Apple Watches, Android Wear, and all those things.
So people talk about Africa doing this leapfrogging thing where people don't care about the desktop as much. You get your smartphone, if that does the trick for you, or if you don't want to buy a desktop or a laptop, you just don't buy it. Does this lead to any interesting differences in how people live their lives if your main computer is your smartphone rather than, I think of the way I live my life, I kind of use my smartphone throughout the day, but the laptop or my desktop is really my hub, and I'm kind of like not doing any intensive stuff on my phone. I'm just kind of like, I'm going to save that complex email I'm going to have to write. I'm going to save it for later. I'm not going to do it on my phone. I'm going to wait till I get home. What kinds of things do people do differently because the smartphone is the primary computer?
I think a lot of people, for example, in Nigeria, use the mobile phone to access online content. So social media, articles and all of that. And a lot of people kind of just use the desktop at work, and after work or throughout the day are mostly on their mobile phones and accessing online content that way. And if you think about also, internet access, not a lot of people have access to the internet outside of work, where, they have the infrastructure and, the money to set up internet. And so a lot of people end up using, their mobile devices to access online content. And they also kind of have those little portable Wi-Fi hotspots that they carry around to access the internet as well.
What are the other tech companies in Africa that are inspiring to you?
There's, I think, one tech company that is inspiring to me is Konga. And it's one of the largest, if not the largest, e-commerce site currently in Nigeria. And I think they are very inspiring in terms of how they are, not only just kind of replicating, something that's working in the West, like, Amazon, using that and replicating that here, but they're actually using technology to improve like the user experience and improve the quality of their product. And they are, using, cutting edge technologies like, progressive web apps to make the mobile experience better and things like that, considering the limited connectivity that a lot of people have in Africa. So I think Konga is probably one of the tech companies that I admire.
I did an interview about a year ago with these two brothers from Africa, Osine and Anesi Ikianosime, and I think they introduced me to the people from Andela who got me in touch with you, which I appreciate. And over time, I've become friends with these two brothers. They're teenagers. They built Crocodile Browser. I encourage anybody to check out Crocodile Browser if you're looking for an interesting browser. And what has struck me, a number of things struck me about that conversation that I had, the interview I did with Osina and Anesi. One thing was just that they were so similar to me in terms of the content that they were consuming, because they're software engineers, they're interested in tech, they're interested in entrepreneurship. It was basically like I was talking to somebody in Silicon Valley, and I couldn't notice any striking cultural differences or anything. It was this very interesting moment for me that was sort of like this feeling of globalization. I don't know, kind of made me feel warm and fuzzy. But what are the ways in which African engineers are different than American engineers? Are there striking differences, or are there not many differences?
I think it depends. I think it depends on how much exposure the African engineers have had. So I think a lot of the engineers are like tech companies or even self-taught engineers that are just generally really interested in technology are very similar because they are really interested in technology and just software craftsmanship. So they kind of expose themselves to how things are done elsewhere and how the best companies are doing things. So they are following blogs, following podcasts, and all those things. But then the ones that don't really have had that exposure, are different, and you probably wouldn't be able to relate to them as much. For example, you will see some engineers that have never used GitHub as of 2 years ago, and kind of were sharing their code base, using drives and things like that. So I think that's one thing where Andela is trying to kind of change that space, or helping change that space, where we're trying to provide our developers that exposure into what other companies are doing, what other technology companies are doing, so that they can bring that back here into the African tech ecosystem and start flourishing the whole space.
What are the problems in Africa that you think will be solved by technology in the near future?
I think in a country like Nigeria, I think the public transportation system will be solved by technology. I think the traffic issues will be solved by technology. I think, yeah, those two definitely, I think, will be solved by technology.
Cultural issue. What about cultural issues like gender equality or this kind of stuff? You think that's improved by social networks or?
But by social networks, perhaps I think it probably be more improved as we start seeing more, female founders, like female tech founders, and like seeing more females being interested in technologies and like joining companies like Andela, because they want to be software engineers and like taking positions are the thriving tech companies in Africa.
Sure, and Andela is a leader in making that happen, obviously. So what about the internet infrastructure in Africa? How good is it, and what do you think of these efforts to improve it? Like, I think Google's got something, Facebook with the free basics stuff. What do you think of these efforts?
Mm-hmm. I think the internet, the actual internet connectivity is actually not that bad. I think I remember the first time that when I moved back to Africa and came to Nigeria, I initially had those thoughts like, how's the internet connectivity here? But like in our office, like the internet connectivity is very strong. We have fiber optic, and even the MiFi and like the hotspots that people have are like really good and have internet connectivity. I think the problem is very expensive to set up or to acquire. So I think all those initiatives would be really helpful in order to give a broader set of people access to internet when it's more when it becomes more commodity, like the same way it is in the US, for example.
Yeah, that is exactly how I feel. That's what I've tried to report on this free basics stuff some, particularly when that the India stuff happened and I guess free basics was kind of like voted against or something like that, and I just didn't understand at all, because like even if you have this internet service that maybe is like not entirely neutral, who would vote against better internet connectivity? It's just so insane to me.
Yeah,
that was just so insane to me. Oh gosh. Anyway, and it was I don't know. It's funny because of the people who were apparently like the people that were voting against it were the ones who had good internet, as I understood.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So anyway, what's we're wrapping up near the end of our time. Have any companies copied Andela? Have there been any copycats or maybe similar businesses that have sprouted up in Africa doing a similar thing? Because obviously there's so many applications. There's no way that you can get the entire fire hose of talent that's coming your way.
Right. I believe in Nigeria there has been one, I believe, that's doing something similar. But I think that in the major tech hubs in Africa, like Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, there are similar things, not exactly the same thing, but there's like a lot of companies that are trying to develop like that talent and like get people to be interested in technology and software development in general.
What's in the future for Andela? What have we not touched on?
That's an interesting question. I think in the future of Andela, I think it's to get a larger footprint on the African continent, I think, and really get more and more people to apply to the program and join the program, go through the program, I think that's kind of like in the immediate future. I think in the really long future, 10 years from now, I think what we really want is like, all of these really talented people to now, go back into, the African tech ecosystem and kind of like create this ripple effect of just really, really great technology companies that are starting to get created and solving all of the problems in Africa and just, improving the lives of everyone.
Yeah. And are there challenges associated with scaling? Because when I talk to these boot camps, it sounds like scaling is so hard because you need a lot of people to be doing the training as well as many technology companies, like software companies, so companies that are totally based in software, like a social network or something. You just buy more servers, and that's how you scale. But if you're an organization like Andela and you need to have people that are doing training, you need to have all these humans in the loop, it's not as much of a straightforward equation. So is that a kind of a bottleneck to scaling where you really need to have really solid talent that in order to scale?
Right. So I think in the beginning, we need to find these people to facilitate the learning of our developers, and they need to have the experience, obviously, to be able to do that. But I think as we scale and as our own developers are becoming really, really good and are advancing their levels, we can start seeing them supporting our pipeline supporting itself, where you have all of these great people that have already gone through a certain stage of the pipeline and they're like really good and more experienced, and then have them come back and like support, mentor, run the learning facilitation and all those things, and kind of like our business kind of supporting itself that way. So that's kind of how we're thinking about scaling.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Y Combinator effect, where people who go through Y Combinator, the number one thing that they want to do is go back to Y Combinator somehow.
Yeah.
All right, Brice. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I am really intrigued by Andela, and I hope to do more shows on it in the future. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/SEDaily. That's SYMPHONO.com/SEDaily. Thanks again, Symphono.